Hi, welcome to the Stockyard Industrial Lead. I'm Eric Miller, and today we're going to be talking about train control and track authority for small switching layouts, and specifically we're going to be talking about track warrants, track warrant control, and I'm going to show you how I do that on my layout just as an idea for controlling the operation of your trains. So one thing that you'll notice about my layout, or may have noticed during these last several videos, is that I don't have any sort of signaling system on my layout. You'll notice these signals that I have up here are, what are called blacked out signals, or basically they have their signal heads turned to the side, which means that they could still be functional, but the railroad doesn't use them. I see this a lot on some parts of the Rock Island, like for example, the Kyle Railroad through Kansas has a lot of signals like this. So basically, this railroad, or the layout represents the railroad that used to have heavy service on the main line, so it used to have signals, automatic block signals. But now that it's just a little industrial spur, it doesn't need signals anymore. And more specifically, talking about model railroad layouts, I find that an elaborate signaling system is very hard to put into place. You've got to figure out the wiring, and you've also got to figure out how you're going to hook it up to a computer to start dispatching it. And so for a small switching layout like this, I find it a lot easier to operate what is essentially called dark territory, which basically means there's no signaling system. And that's largely because the traffic is so light. Now, the trick is then, how do you go about operating in dark territory? How does the crew get authority for the track? Because you still have, a lot of times in dark territory, you'll have multiple trains crossing directions. And, you have turnouts like these, you'll have sidings. So how does a train figure out where it's going? And, you don't want it to run into other trains. And, in a lot of cases with dark territory, you still have some kind of a centralized dispatcher somewhere. And so you don't have somebody actively watching, the main line and the track to make sure that trains are staying out of the way. So how do you do this? And so the answer to that is TWC, or Track Warrant Control. And I find this to be very effective. I also think it's a really cool idea for operators to use on a layout because it again adds and enhances the realism. And it's a really hands-on way that operators can get into running the trains. So I thought I would show you how I do it on my layout, and also how it's kind of evolved over time. And then I thought maybe this might give you some ideas, but there's some other resources out there that you could consider. Now, when I started looking at mine, there wasn't a whole lot of resources out there, really. The biggest one that I started with was the Santa Cruz and Northern, which was a model railroad that used track warrant control and was featured in a magazine. And I'll show that up here on the screen. And so that was really the only example I could find at that time. Now there's several others, thanks to the internet and more people being online, more modelers being out there and showing you, like myself, what they use. So that's helpful. What I also did was I looked up some real world examples. I started out with a track warrant that the Iowa Interstate uses, which is a very long form. And so one thing that you'll notice that real railroaders do is they have a lot larger track warrant form and more options than I think what we modelers can use. What you want to do is make it a little bit more what I call digestible, so that visitors to your layout, especially ones that haven't used track warrants before and track warrant control, are able to grasp how this works. And so you have to keep in mind that a lot of operators coming to your layout may not have used whatever kind of track authority and train control you use. So you want to keep that in mind and make sure that it's simple. So I'll show you my track warrant next and kind of give you a brief history of that. So here we are at my dispatcher's desk, and one thing you want to keep in mind that's important with these track warrants is, in addition to not having them too confusing for your visitors and guests that are operating on the layout, is you want to make sure that the crew, the conductor in this case, doesn't have too much stuff to fumble with when they're operating on your layout. And so that's one reason why I really like having a crew of 2 people. So you've got one person whose sole responsibility is managing the locomotive and the throttle, and then you've got your conductor that is in charge of everything and deals with the paperwork. So I give my conductor this clipboard, and the track warrant is something that's really easy to keep with the clipboard. And so that's helpful. Now, admittedly, I haven't updated my track warrant in a few years. The last time I was using it was when I was modeling the SPSF, and my layout was called the Meadow Subdivision. Um, so this is a little bit old, but it's basically the best track warrant that I came up with over the years. And today my layout is so simple. I only have one train, really. Sometimes I'll run a transfer into the South Omaha yard myself, but otherwise I just have one crew and one train, so I don't really need a track warrant anymore. If I did, it'd be a pretty simple authority that I would give the crew. So this is a track warrant that I used back when I had multiple crews. I would have a crew that would run the road job and some transfers, and then I had my local crew. And so they would meet on the main line, and so I really needed a track warrant there so that I could set up meeting points. So I'll go through this track warrant. As I said, it was an evolution. What I did is the first track warrant was very long and a little complex, and I found out that I didn't use a lot of the things on here. So these are basically the things that I use. So what I would suggest is to come up with your track warrant is kind of think about what you use in an op session and then test it out and revise it. And what I ended up doing was having these printed out as pads of paper, which is kind of cool because they're easy to get. But you can also print yourself your own out just using like Microsoft Excel and filling it out with things that you want on the track warrant, and then printing it out and trying it out for a few op sessions. And then once you nail it down like I did, then I went ahead and had these printed out by a company that does pads of paper. So to back it up a little bit, big picture, track warrant controls are basically giving the crew the verbal authority from a dispatcher over the track. And so telling them where they can go and when they can go. I find the time is just as important as the where, what part of the railroad they can cover. And so after that, it's kind of open to you what you want to put on it. Now, this one, I have some of the simple things. I'd like to number my track warrants so that I can say that the track warrant is void, which is one of these selections up here. I say 2, so that this will be what the train number is, and then the location of the train, also put the date on there. And then you've got a number of check boxes. Now these are important because when you're talking to your crew as a dispatcher, you want them to say checkbox, so certain number. So that way it's very clear as to what number you give them to. Now you won't give them all of these numbers, you'll probably just use 1 or 2. For example, for just starting out, we'll probably just say checkbox 2, proceed from South Omaha to Bellevue, and then maybe checkbox 7, not in effect until maybe 700 hours. Give them a start time at 7 o'clock, that sort of thing, and that's it. But some other ones you might say, take a sighting at here. You might say that you might schedule a meet with them, say not in effect until after the arrival of whatever train, and then you can go, that sort of thing. You also might want to put when this authority expires, so that way they don't have all day to do their work, so that there's some kind of release and amount of time so that another crew can come by and use that track. And then finally, you want to have it okayed at a certain time and by dispatcher, which again is usually me when I'm running my op sessions, because I found that I could for a small switching layout, I could do all these types of positions and not bore somebody with the dispatcher position, which in my experience, a lot of people didn't really like to do. They want to run the trains, understandably. So those are the main things. Again, you can do a lot of online research and find out what other things you want to put on a track warrant. But I found these to be the most helpful for my layout when I was doing the SPSF Meadow subdivision. If I was doing a track warrant control now for my even smaller small switching layout, which is just an industrial spur, I'd probably, I don't know, I might leave it the same, but I might take out some things like hold main track. But basically I want to tell the crew that you can go from a certain point to another spot. And then the work between is helpful, because let's say that I just want them to be able to work from South Omaha to Bellevue, and then and that'll basically cover their entire day. And then they can go out from South Omaha to Bellevue and come back, and that's it. And then that way the crew knows that they have the authority to use the track, that there's not going to be any other trains out there, or if there are, they're going to know about it because it'll be on the track warrant and what to look out for. And so it just keeps everything safe. Again, you're not using signals, but you're using locations on the railroad. That's what I did. You could also use mileposts here, but on my layout, I would use locations like South Omaha, Albright, or Bellevue, which is which relates to what is on the employee timetable and the information there. So yeah, I think those are the main points about track warrants, and or I should say, my track warrants that I developed. Like I said, what I suggest is coming up with something that is pretty basic, test it out a few times, see if it works, and you know, come up with some adjustments, make a few redesigns, and then as you test it out, and then you'll have something that works great. And then what I did is I would have the crew write this out themselves, just like the railroads, and I would dictate it to them verbally. I didn't have an elaborate radio system set up since it's such a small layout. I would just, if a crew needed a new track warrant, I would just have them say, "Dispatcher, I need a track warrant," and then I would come over to where they are and then have them fill it out. And then they would tear this off and keep it with them in their clipboard. And then whenever it expired or they needed a new one, then I would just give them a new one. So yeah, that's basically how it works. And next I will talk a little bit more about the operation of it now that you know what the form looks like. So just some basic notes about the operation with the track warrants. Again, it really is helpful because you don't need the elaborate signaling system set up. So for example, this is my Gemini sighting, and I've got a turnout down here for the north end or east end of the sighting, and it's a manually controlled turnout. So this would normally have a signaling system where you would have a signal down on this end for the trains coming this way, and then you'd have signals for each of these tracks for trains going that way. But instead they have a track warrant control that says you have the authority. You might use this sighting as a location for on your track warrant, for example. And then this train here, which is one of my local switchers, has the authority to come through here. And this also could be a meeting spot. So for example, if you've got more than one train running on your small switching layout or your layout, this could be a spot that you tell one of the jobs to hold here, and then the other job will be passing on this track. So that's just an example of kind of how it works operationally on the layout, how it could save you a little bit of infrastructure, and also, like I said, kind of enhance the realism, get some more hands-on stuff for operators to do on your operation-centric layout, if you're like me and like to do that sort of thing. And then you don't have to worry about crew members running red signals, I guess. But you do have to worry a little bit about them paying attention to the track warrants, although I've never really had an issue with that. Something that's written down there is pretty good statement of what they can and can't do. So that's basically it. I think that covers it. Some of the background research that I did, the reason for it, how I developed mine, and then also just how it works on the layout. So I hope this is helpful to you. I hope it gives you some ideas of track warrants that you might want to do in the future. And feel free to leave any questions or comments below if you have anything else for me on this topic, or if there's any other subjects that you want me to cover, just feel free to let me know. So thanks again, everyone, for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next week for another new video here on the Stockyard Industrial Lead.